As we talk about exit strategy today, it's going to be the connective thread all through the tour. We'll go off on tangents, but we'll keep coming back to that connective thread. Now, you see a lot in the news today involving the current war with exit strategy. How many troops are going to be coming home, and what's the timetable? And both sides argue what would be the best measured coming home time or schedule. It's a hot button issue in the news right now. For those of you who lived during the Vietnam era, you know about the exit strategy there. Some of you watch the developments on television, as we do with the current situation in the Middle East. Just about every war this country's been in, there's been an exit strategy somewhere along the way. There's a timetable, there are a reduction of troops, eventually there's a small base of troops that guard an area. Well, in that broader scheme, we're going to discuss Lee's exit strategy. Now, I know that you already know this, but just to state it up front, these two armies, after Pickett's charge, didn't simply separate and in huge title words across the screen, it read "The End," and it was over and both sides just walked away. No, General Lee had to retreat for his life. And when we say exit strategy, we mean what? EX means out. The fact that there was a battle here is in thanks to General Custer and Norval Churchill and others that were with Custer and with Judson Kilpatrick. They created a fight that Lee did not want. You're going to see that theme time and time again. When Confederates are given the option of stopping their trains or stopping their men, they just keep going. They don't want to fight. They don't want to give Meade opportunities to fight. Now, that's not to say they don't put up a strong resistance. And Bill Dowling's going to talk about that later when he investigates the strategy of the time and the military thinking of the time. Now, lest you think this was an insignificant fight and that Troy, Mike, and Bill have taken you out in the mountains just to have some fun, keep in mind this was a terribly significant fight just in numbers. Gary Adelman, one of the licensed guides and a published historian author that's here in the crowd, estimates that about 1,100 men were lost, killed, wounded, captured on Little Round Top on July 2nd. Would you all agree Little Round Top's very famous? Okay, very, very famous. Perhaps one of the most famous spots in all of American history. Well, at Monterey, if we're looking just at sheer numbers, if you count the Confederates that are captured or killed or wounded along with Custer's men who attacked, who are killed, wounded, or captured, between Monterey Pass and Leitersburg, which is the extent of the trains that are captured, there are about 1,300 to 1,500 casualties. This battle exceeds Little Round Top in casualties. Also, if you consider some of the research that William G. Davis has done, some of you know William G. Davis that lives in Gettysburg, he's taken a close look at Monterey as it fits into other battles in Pennsylvania history. And depending on how you play with the numbers, whether Monterey had 1,000 casualties, 1,300, 1,500, depending on where you break off in those numbers, Monterey fits around 5th, 6th, or 7th in casualties of the most costliest battle in Pennsylvania history. First is, of course, Gettysburg. Then you have the Revolutionary War battles of Brandywine, Germantown, the French-Indian War battles. Pennsylvania has a lot of history, doesn't it? Of Fort Duquesne, of Fort Necessity, and it's right after that that Monterey Pass, the fight here on July 4th, around midnight and into the wee hours of the morning of July 5th, 1863, becomes the 6th costliest battle in Pennsylvania's history. So this is not a sideshow. This is a battle that's been long overdue of having a spotlight shown on it. And just a little bit of local flair for you. The term Monterey has a certain ring to it, doesn't it? Does it not? It has a special sound to it. And there are two theories on how the term Monterey came to be here. One is that and you may have to help me pronounce this, Empress Iturbide, who was deposed from Mexico. She was the Empress of Mexico. Her husband was deposed. She had been the Empress in Mexico from 1822, 1823, fled north after her husband was executed, and legend has it that she passed through the area we now call Monterey and made a comment about it reminded her of her native Monterey, Mexico. And then she made a comment from another view overlooking the mountains in Cumberland Valley. She said she was overheard to say Buena Vista, which is beautiful view, okay, or good view. Buena Vista and Monterey were both battles in the Mexican War fought by Zachary Taylor, successful for the U.S. in the Mexican conflict between 1846 and 48. That ties into the second theory for the name of this area, which is those were two names in the headlines, in the newspapers at the time, and this area was being settled at that time, so it coincided to give it that name. It would be, for example, in the 1960s, it seemed as though a lot of girls were being named Lisa after Lisa Presley. It's one of those things. It's a name that sticks because it was a popular event at the time. Having created that context, remember, exit strategy means out. Lee wants to get out. General Lee, where are you? I know you're a fighter, but you need to get home. And Mike is now, my colleague Mike Vallone is going to make that clear because he's going to show you what this campaign was largely about in General Lee's and Jefferson Davis, the Confederate president's eyes.
Thank you, Troy.
Yeah.
Good job. So, the Battle of Monterey, July 4th, 1863. It's on the retreat as Confederates come back after the defeat of Gettysburg. Okay? It's the way it happened. I can't change that. The fighting action is going to happen on this road right behind you that we're going to be walking today. This is where all the fighting is happening. Okay? The road of the wagon train is basically on the other side of the hill. That's where the wagon train is going to go down. You're going to see the intersection of the two roads when we finish down there, okay? Bill, if you would hold this up a little bit. This is a map, topographical map. And you see here's Gettysburg. This is the South Mountain Range. We're basically right here along these mountains, right up in here, okay? Now, right after Pickett's charge, Lee is deciding that he has to retreat, and he has to do a lot of work. He's got a long wagon train of misery. You've heard about that, all the wounded. And that wounded wagon train is going to go through the westernmost route through Cashtown Pass. Okay, that's Imboden's wagon train. But most people think it has all of the Confederate wounded. It doesn't. It has A.P. Hill and Longstreet and Stewart's cavalry, okay? Ewell's wounded are going to go through the wagon train that's going to come through these passes here, okay? Basically, the road network, you see how important it is. And this mountain range, how it is protecting Lee's army as he comes up north. In order to understand the retreat, you have to understand the invasion. And the latest book, a great book by Kent Masterson Brown, you'll meet a little later, really brings to the forefront how important or what the real focus of this invasion was. We all know there's so many multifaceted reasons why Lee's up here. But I believe now that he's coming up here to feed his army. It's as simple as that. One fact, January, February, March of 1863, the winter, the Confederate Army has issued 400,000 pounds of meat. Now, with their logistical supports, it's about 90,000 men. Anybody want to do the math here? It's about 5 pounds of meat over 90 days. I pretty much eat 5 pounds of meat in a week, right, Bill? I'll tell you. Okay? So these guys are starving, but it's not just the men, because even if he feeds the men, his horses are dying. They're literally dying from starvation. There's nothing for them to eat. After 2 years of warfare, both armies have scoured Virginia clean. He is dying. His army is dying. What happens if you don't feed an army? It's going to disintegrate. Even if you feed your men, if you don't have animals, you can't move anywhere, and you're doomed also. So, Lee is going to plan the Gettysburg campaign, right? There you go. Am I right so far?
So far.
So far. Okay. I'm going to check with him periodically. Lee is going to slip away from the Union Army on June 3rd. They're facing each other in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and they're going to go to the west and then north through the Shenandoah Valley, using the Blue Ridge Mountains to hide and protect their army. Okay? Lee has chosen Richard Ewell, the 2nd Corps commander, to lead the advance of the Confederate Army. One of the reasons I think he is using Ewell's Corps is that they have the best quartermaster in the Confederate Army. Ewell's Corps is Stonewall Jackson's old corps, and their quartermaster is Major John Harman, no relation to Troy. Well, this guy, he really is a profane man. Even Jackson was horrified at the profanity of Major Harman. You wouldn't go for that, Troy. No relation. See, I knew it. But even Jackson put up with it. And you know how pious a man Jackson was. He put up with it because this man gets things done. And he's going to do the same thing for Ewell and Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia. The minute the Confederates cross the Potomac River, they're going to start scouring the Cumberland Valley, literally taking everything they can get their hands on. And they're going to have a pipeline down through the Cumberland Valley all the way through the Shenandoah Valley to Winchester, all the way down to Staunton, where the railroad is, where they can put these supplies on the railroad which goes to Richmond. The minute they are over, they are scouring. And this mountain range is protecting Lee's army to do this, okay? You know all about the battles of Middleburg, Upperville, all those. It's the the Union Army, Union Cavalry trying to get through the mountain range to find out what Lee's doing. But as long as he has those passes guarded, his army is free to scour the whole Cumberland Valley. So they literally come up this valley, and from one end to the other, these are the Alleghenies over here, and here's South Mountain. They are scouring the whole valley. Not only that, but eventually Ewell will go all the way up to Harrisburg, to Carlisle, right? Behind them is Longstreet and A.P. Hill's Corps. Now, the Army has a quartermaster. Each corps has a quartermaster. Plus they have a commissary of subsistence officers. They also have division officers of that rank, brigade officers of that rank, and regimental officers of that rank. Thousands and thousands of men are scouring the Pennsylvania valleys. Now, you know about Early going all the way to the Susquehanna River? You know about that, right? He goes through Gettysburg on June 26th. He goes all the way to York, again, gathering supplies, all the way to the Susquehanna at Wrightsville where they do the bridge. Hold that up just a moment. Imagine the area that Lee is commanding here in Pennsylvania. Waynesboro, right down the road, there's a book about it. 15 days under in an occupied city. 15 days they're under occupation by the Confederate Army. And the whole valley of Pennsylvania is occupied. And Kent Brown's book, the subtitle is Lee, Longstreet, and the Pennsylvania Campaign. And I think that's really true. And like Gary Edelman and Tim Smith all the time, they love setting a precedent and try to get something named differently. Well, I agree that we should start calling this the Pennsylvania Campaign, not the Gettysburg Campaign. It's more than just those 3 days. Tens and tens of thousands of Pennsylvanians in York County, Franklin County, Adams County, up at Carlisle and Harrisburg, and all through this huge swath of Pennsylvania. Tens of thousands of Pennsylvanians are involved. So I hope you'll all start calling it the Pennsylvania Campaign and agree with Kent Masterson Brown. You going to go with that? Yeah. All right, very good. Okay. Lee, his total focus is supplies. The first thing he does when he realizes Pickett's charge is a disaster, he's going to order the reserve wagon train of Harman, Major Harman, Ewell's quartermaster. His train basically is through the Cashdown Pass. Through the Cashdown Pass, it comes down the Oratana Road, and it's almost to Fairfield. It's between 20 and 25 miles long. First thing he does, head out. 3 a.m., they're the first ones that leave because they are the important factor. That food, those supplies, those horses, cattle, I mean, it's amazing. If you read the book, you know how much. It's amazing what Kent Brown came up with, the amazing amounts, the intensity of the foraging that they do up here and the stuff that they take out of this country, this area. That is his first focus. And he's going to have them leave first. The other wagon train of Misery, Imboden's wagon train, they don't leave till about 4 p.m. on July 4th. 3 a.m. Harman's train is gone, okay? Behind Harman's train is going to be the division trains of Ewell's Corps, Rhodes, Johnson, and Early. That includes quartermaster trains, subsistence trains, ordnance, and ambulances. Behind that is the whole rest of the Army of Northern Virginia. This train that comes through this pass behind us, where you're going to see a little later, is 57 miles long. Kent, in his book, he estimates that Lee will take about 50,000 head of cattle out of Pennsylvania, about 35,000 sheep, 20 to 25,000 horses, thousands of pigs and chickens and turkeys, thousands of barrels of flour, leather, harness, curry combs, anything the Confederacy can use, they're going to take out of here. Paper products, everything they can use, right? What else?
Horseshoes.
Horseshoes, there you go. Nails. Horseshoes. Nails, metal, anything they can use, they're taking out of here. They're not only taking this stuff, but every farm they go to, they're also taking the wagons to take the stuff in to take it back to Virginia. They're using anything from a buggy, you know, a nice horse-drawn buggy, to the biggest wagon. By the way, how big is a Civil War wagon? Anybody want to take a shot? It's the size of a yellow school bus. There's going to be 6,000 of them coming through this pass, besides the whole rest of the army. Meade, of course, is not just sitting around. He orders his cavalry to head south. Buford goes to Frederick and tries to intercept the Confederate wagon train through Turner's Pass. You know about that, South Mountain, Antietam. Kilpatrick is ordered to Emmitsburg, and he's going to catch the Emmitsburg-Waynesboro Turnpike. Those of you who have the handout, you can see it on there. Let's pull that one up. This is the Emmitsburg-Waynesboro Turnpike. Okay, this is the bottom of the hill here. We are right here, okay? Don't call this anything else but the Waynesboro-Emmitsburg Turnpike. It's the main east-west route. Here's Fairfield up here. Here's the wagon train on the Maria Furnace Road, all the way down on the western side of Monterey Peak, and it intersects the Waynesboro Turnpike here, where we're going to finish a little later. The trouble with understanding what happened here is all the roads are different today. On your map, I show you this is the old road where the wagon train came down. This no longer exists. There's a new road that cuts in here and comes on the east side of Monterey Peak and intersects down the road where the railroad tracks are. You'll see it a little later.
Credit the map.
What's that?
Credit the map.
Yeah. What's credit the map?
Credit.
What do you mean? Oh yeah, this map is this map is out of Eric Wittenberg's article in the August 1909 North and South, where he did a great job. There are some things I don't agree with. This, it says Fairfield Gap, and this is Monterey Gap. It's all the same gap, Monterey Gap. So, Kilpatrick comes down to Emmitsburg. He's going to come up this road and try and intercept through Monterey Pass the Confederate wagon train. And we'll pick that up a little later. Any questions?
All these passes, are they groomed passes, or are they primitive, that they're having some pioneers that had to cut trees and...
No, they are passes through, but they're very rocky. You know, they're not like paved. You know, you're going to see it a little later. It's still there today. Now, this is private ground up there. They will shoot you if you go up there. Okay? I want to be clear on that. We have some independent people out here in Blue Ridge Summit. Right, Gary? Okay. But yeah, this is private land. Troy and I and a few of us, we got permission to go up there. You'll be able to see the trace of it. It's still there today, but it is private. So please don't go up there without you asking people permission. Troy? Yes, sir. This is a turnpike. This one is. The wagon train is basically a rock-strewn road. Very rugged. The cavalry is coming up. See, there's another troublemaker. This is the road. Waynesboro-Emmitsburg Turnpike. This is where the fighting is going to be. There is no fighting on that road. It's just a train coming down. It's not till the train intersects the Waynesboro Turnpike where Custer and his men hit it. Yes, this is a turnpike. That's correct. It's the main east-west road. Today, you know, it's called Charmian Road or Charmian Road. Okay, the Sunshine Trail. All the way out to Waynesboro, right.
Defined paved.
Oh, defined paved, yeah. A turnpike is like a hard-based surface. Right, something like that, yeah. Okay? Any other questions? We're going to move because I know you don't like standing in the same place. Is that okay? Oh, I'm sorry. More questions.
This is not Sunshine Trail here. Sunshine Trail.
Right, down, I'm saying all these different names, the confusion exists because all these names change. Mariah Furnace Road is, you see how sensitive they are up here, is now called Iron Springs Road. But the road comes down, the one that intersects, the new one is called Furnace Road. Okay? You answer me that. You're local? How does that work out? So, that's a lot of confusion when people come up here that the roads, some of the names are the same, but they're the wrong road now. So you really have to get some local help out here, and we have so many people that have helped us. The One Mountain Foundation, Mary Ray Cantwell, Charlie and Undine Warner, Joe and Rex Benshoff, so many people. I'll try and mention them as we go along, but we had so much help by the local people here, and I wouldn't have been able to do it if I can. Yes, question?
The reason why the roads are confusing is because we're in 4 counties and 2 states.
That's correct. That's also why the One Mountain Foundation has problems. How you all have problems up here getting things done. There are 2 states here. You're right on the border of Maryland. You got 4 counties. Think about that bureaucratic, logistical nightmare. 4 counties, 2 states. But let me tell you, Gary Muller, where is he? He's done an amazing job. And you should all come together to preserve your heritage up here. That's what the One Mountain Foundation means. One mountain. That's really cool. No. Of course. You're trying to steal my thunder. We'll show you everything. I'll show you everything. But I'm going to watch you. Okay. Troy, let's go.
I'm here. Everybody about face and come this way. We're going out into the road. General Custer's going to hold up in the rear. Thank you. I just want to say, for what it's worth, hey, I'm excited about it. I can't help it. Preliminary accounts are we exceeded 500. So give yourself a round of applause. I want to thank Mike Heideco, who's here to my immediate right, who's been helping in many different intangible ways. Without him, we wouldn't get it done. And also Dave Colville, who's been doing the same. He's out in the audience. Dave, I'll need you to come forward shortly. Okay, good. As we talk about exit strategy, let's focus now on how Lee's army is going to leave Gettysburg after Pickett's charge. Right after Pickett's charge is over, Lee is already thinking about pulling out. Yes, the 2 armies stare at each other for 12 or more hours, but Lee is figuring out a way to get the heck out of Gettysburg. Some of you know that right after Pickett's charge, General Meade contemplated a counterattack. Some of you were with me on that tour last year. And he sent out Farnsworth's cavalry charge as part of that attack. Okay, and he sent armed reconnaissances through the wheat field, about 3,000 men altogether, to see to the feasibility of making a counterattack. When Lee pulled back and changed location, it became impractical to try to make the attack. A thunderstorm hit about 6:30 on July 3rd. That really dampened his efforts. More importantly, the Confederates pulled back to Seminary Ridge and Warfield Ridge. That meant that Meade would have had to launch an attack from the Peach Orchard at 6 o'clock, and it was dark by 7:15, so that window of opportunity closed. Probably General Hancock's wounding had a lot to do with the Confederates being able to escape after Pickett's charge. The command and control broke down once he was wounded. The Confederates enjoyed a break there. But Lee then had his men fall back to Seminary, Warfield Ridge, Oak Ridge over the next 12 hours, pulling his left back from the Hanover Road all the way to Oak Ridge and his right all the way back to Warfield Ridge, his center at Seminary Ridge. He had his men build breastworks all along the line. General Meade would make a comment in a letter to his wife that the Confederates wanted him to attack against fortified positions. He said, I've played that game. We're not going to play that game again. Meanwhile, Lee is talking to Imboden late that evening. General Imboden was in charge of the wounded trains, and at 11 p.m. Lee will make a comment about the third day being too bad, too bad, but he would then give specific orders to Imboden to guard those trains and make sure that they made it through the Cashtown Pass. He would give him a sealed package, not to be opened until it made it to Richmond, only for Jefferson Davis's eyes. Where is Jefferson Davis, the Confederate president? Only for your eyes, sir.
Right here, sir.
So Lee's thinking the evening of...
Lee awaits the news.
Thank you, Mr. Confederate President. So the Confederates are falling back, thinking about falling back with just an hours after Pickett's charge, but they're building breastworks. Around midnight of July 4th, somewhere in that vicinity, all the breastworks, just slightly behind Seminary Ridge, are set fire to. And you'll find this in Kent Masterson Brown's book on Lee's retreat, creating 9, 10-story smoke partitions, so that even Little Round Top signal station has to strain to see what's going on. Lee's creating a smoke screen so he can start sending all these supplies that Mike talked about at the last stop back through the Monterey Pass. And we feel comfortable calling this Monterey. Not only was it referred to that locally, but the general's reports and the officers' reports who fought here referred to it that way. Now, as Lee's falling back, he's going to have his trains leave first. The two main routes out of Gettysburg for Lee were the Cashtown Road through Cashtown Pass, and the other one, slightly parallel and south of it, would have been the Fairfield Road, which leads through Fairfield Pass or Monterey Pass. As Hans Hensel, one of our licensed guides, points out, formerly with the U.S. Marine Corps, as Hans Hensel points out, Monterey Pass and Fairfield Pass are one and the same. They're one and the same. So the Fairfield roads and Cashtown roads have to be covered on the retreat. It would have come with some alarm to Lee to be informed that the 6th U.S. Cavalry was attacking along the Fairfield Road shortly after Pickett's charge. Jones' Virginia Cavalry would fend them off and ultimately win that fight, but it would have been a warning to Lee that his LOC, his lines of communication and supply, were vulnerable if he didn't start retrograding pretty soon. For General Meade, on the Union side, his supply line was the Baltimore Pike and to a lesser degree the Taneytown Road. In the same sense, the Cashtown Road and the Fairfield Road are the two roads that Lee has to cover at all times during the battle. Now, some of you know how interested I am in Cemetery Hill and how that's Lee's primary objective all during the battle. One proof for that, aside from any written evidence, and there's plenty to that, is that as long as Lee's lines of communication and supply remained on the Cashtown Road and Fairfield Road, Cemetery Hill had to be his goal, because he had to keep his supplies directly square in the center of his line. Unless the supplies had been moved south of the Round Tops, then a flanking maneuver is out of the question. So Lee has to stay square on that center. If he takes Cemetery Hill, he controls the road juncture of the Baltimore Pike, Taneytown Road, Emmitsburg Road, which allows his trains to pass to that juncture while he proceeds on roads either towards Frederick or Westminster or wherever Meade decides to give battle next. So he's trying to cover that supply line, keep it square in the center of his line at all times, directly behind him. As the Confederates start retreating, first off, we have the trains. Wounded going through Cashtown, all the forage supplies, ordnance trains, etc., going through Fairfield Pass or Monterey Pass. Then the infantry follows. The infantry would collapse on itself to retreat. The center pulls out first. A.P. Hill is opposite the fields of Pickett's charge. He's squarely on the Fairfield Road. He pulls out first. That means the flanks, Longstreet on his right, Ewell on his left, are going to collapse in on the center as the center pulls back. That allows the flanks to be protected. That's a textbook way of withdrawing. My colleague Bill Dowling is going to be talking more about that at the next stop. And as the ends collapsed on themselves, Stuart's cavalry stayed with Ewell's corps to cover his left in the area of Oak Hill. Ewell would take up the rear. Union's 6th Corps would pursue them along the way. A.T. Corbett's New Jersey Brigade and Thomas Neal's brigade of the 6th Corps would pursue, staying a half a day to a day's march behind them on the Fairfield Road. Remember, the trains go first, then the infantry. That puts a barrier between any attacking Federals. The retreat was during the night, and so we're talking about night of July 4th, July 5th, and then into the night of July 5th, the infantry's pulling back. The largest portion of that retreat, the night of July 5th. And as they're retreating, General Lee and Longstreet ordered barns along the Fairfield Road toward Monterey Pass to be set fire to, so that thousands of Confederate troops marching on the Fairfield Road could look way out in the distance and see these glowing barns as a demarcation on where to go. Lee had a spirited talk with Longstreet along the Fairfield Road in a downpour with barns. This must have had a lurid look about it. It really captures the imagination. Barns on fire, rain pouring down. Lee perhaps suggesting to Longstreet that maybe they ought to stop somewhere because of the rains. Longstreet, perhaps concerned that Lee wants to fight again, suggests they keep moving. Lee still has his ire up, still looking for a fight perhaps. Exit strategy is going to demand, though, that they keep moving. They follow those barns in the dark until they make it near Monterey Pass. But before they make it to Monterey Pass, there's going to be a fight here between General Custer and some Confederate cavalry. My colleague Mike Vallone is going to deal with that here shortly. I'm going to make a couple other points, though, first. And that is, behind us we have part of the CSX Railroad, and with us in the audience today, we have a retired Major General. He has his, he wouldn't say this for himself, he's probably embarrassed that I say this, but he has his PhD in metallurgy, okay? And he was on the board of directors of the Norfolk Southern Railroad. And he still has many administrative ties with that railroad and others. If you've been down to the depot that was recently restored, it was open just a couple of times, and I hear it's not going to be open full-time until the fall. The actual train station where Lincoln disembarked when he came to speak on November 19th. It's been recently restored. Bill Aldrich has had a hand in that. Where is Bill, by the way? Raise your hand. There he is back there. Talk to him. He knows a lot more than I do about railroads. He spent a lifetime dealing with it and has published advanced degrees subjects on railroads. Why is all this important? Before you is a rail line. It was completed around 1889, okay, and it's been improved since then. But prior to the Civil War, as early as 1835, Thaddeus Stevens, the famous abolitionist, gained a charter from Pennsylvania to embark on building a railroad that would extend from Hanover to Gettysburg out to these parts. The ultimate hope was to eclipse these mountains and connect with the B&O around Hancock, Maryland, just south of Hagerstown. 1838, they started to make grades west of Gettysburg. One of the more famous one is the Bloody Railroad Cut. And as Bill will tell you, and talk to him on the side because he knows all of this in detail, spent a lifetime studying this type of information. The grades were cut in the general direction, although tracks never laid, in the direction of Monterey Pass. The reason is Thaddeus Stevens had Maria Furnace Iron Works. He owned it. And this is Furnace Road off to our left. And we're only about, a couple miles, 2 miles in that direction from where the furnace is. He owned Catoctin Furnace too. He probably took a financial hit when Jubal Early's troops burned that ironworks during the Gettysburg campaign. Caledonia. What, I said Catherine? Oh, I'm having a flashback to Fredericksburg. Caledonia. His rail lines were to connect the dots and help along his iron furnace business. But after $7,000 of taxpayer money was used, it went belly up, the project did, Thaddeus Stevens gave up the ghost. It was reinstated as a project in 1855, and then by 1859, the rail line from Hanover to Gettysburg was intact, but it terminated at Gettysburg. Now here's the battle connection. The point has been made by some historians that when the Battle of Monterey occurred, and when Judson Kilpatrick and General Custer made their attack at Monterey, yes, they were looking to capture some trains. Yes, they were looking to harass the Confederate flank and rear according to orders all the way from Army headquarters. Yes, they were to break up cohesion and communication in the Confederate ranks and harass them. All those things are true. But another possible outcome of this attack was that Kilpatrick and Custer were trying to ascertain whether Lee was going to do what? Set up his defenses in the Monterey Pass and wait for Meade to pursue him and attack him in the passes. Or they were going to ascertain that Lee was what? Making an exit strategy, heading back as quick as possible to try to feed his army for several months by making his way back to Virginia with all these foodstuffs before the swollen Potomac River prevented him from doing so. The trouble with going too far with that explanation, well, let me finish the explanation because it'll be worth it. The theory says, and this has been proposed by several historians of the retreat, the theory says that if it was determined that Lee was retreating, Meade would move his supply base from Westminster. You'll recall there were 500 rail cars there of medical and food supplies transferred from Baltimore to Westminster via the Western Maryland Railroad by Herman Hoppe. That, along with all the reserve trains of the Federal Army, were kept in Westminster so if a disaster occurred at Gettysburg, the supplies would be safe. The theory goes that if Lee was retreating, the Federal Army, once this battle at Monterey and fights in some other passes along the way, ascertained that Lee was retreating, Meade was going to take his infantry, move from Gettysburg south on a parallel track with the Blue Ridge Mountains, cover his supply line at Westminster and move it up to Frederick, and then proceed with the brunt of his army through passes south of here, such as Crampton, Fox, Turner, Gaps, and attack Lee by way of Frederick, Middletown, and towards the Potomac that way on a east to west route. If, though, this Monterey attack revealed that Lee was fortifying his defenses in the mountains, and again, the 6th Corps brigades that are marching up are going to have to reaffirm this idea. Meade's keeping his ears open to see whether Lee is going to stand and fight. If he's going to stand and fight, the theory goes, Meade would consider shifting his supply base from Westminster to where? Gettysburg. Shifting them by way of the Northern Central Railway from Baltimore up near to Hanover, and then connecting on the Hanover-Gettysburg rail line, bringing the supplies directly in Meade's rear at Gettysburg, as his army then would proceed west, not south, to attack Lee here, making sure then that the supply route connected what? Directly in his back from Gettysburg as he proceeded from east to west. That adds a lot of significance to Monterey, doesn't it? And as a matter of fact, Meade asked Herman Hoppe, a trusted engineer, to look into this possibility. And Herman Hoppe repaired sections of the rail line between Hanover and Gettysburg that had been destroyed by White's Comanches on June 26 when Early's Confederates had come through before the main battle. He repaired them over about a 48-hour period from Hanover to Gettysburg, making the connection with the Northern Central viable again. So indeed, Meade is asking Hoppe to do this, to consider it as a potential supply base. But as my friend in the back, the gentleman that knows so much about railways, Bill Aldridge, points out, he says this would have been a very limited option. A very limited option. Now, I'm very happy talking about this. This is very interesting information. Dave, could you provide the reason for the limited option? Bill has allowed Mike and I to borrow a piece of U-track. Okay, my 4-year-old son was able to remember this as a U-track. Bill told me, turn it upside down and you'll know what it's called. This is a slice cut from the Manassas rail line. It's a Civil War era piece. It's an artifact that he's allowed us to look at, and it's a sliver cut from the top of a rail. And this U piece is considered lower grade track. It's cheaper. As Hans Hensel pointed out, Hans Hensel called Bob Crick, the chief historian at Richmond, to gain this information for us, that one of the problems Lee had during his retreat out of Petersburg and Richmond on April 1st and April 2nd, 1865, was getting food supplies. And one of the reasons they had trouble with food supplies was the Richmond-Danville Railroad was made of this cheap rail. The Gettysburg-Hanover rail line was made of this cheap U rail. It's hollow in the center. It's not solid through and through. So it can only handle 22-ton locomotives and not 45-ton locomotives. The Western Maryland, the B&O, the Northern Central can hold the 45-ton. The Gettysburg-Hanover Railroad was a very cheap rail line. Bill estimates it would have probably taken Halp about an hour to tell me that would not do as a main supply base, not for the whole Army's supplies. Furthermore, there was only a small round table for a turnaround in Gettysburg, where the fire station sits today on Stratton Street. When Lincoln came to speak in November and came in on November 18th on that rail line, the locomotive would have had to disconnect. The conductors would have had to turn the brake to stop the coach, disconnect from the small locomotive. It would have backed up towards the roundhouse, turned around, and then backed up to the single coach. But before it did, the conductor had to then turn the brake to release it and roll the single carriage towards a brick wall, which is now the train station depot, and hope not to hit the wall for that single coach to unload. This is hardly a supply base for the Army of the Potomac for 95,000 men and 20 to 30,000 horses. Well, 40,000 horses if you count the cavalry. So it's a limited option. And by the way, what I've seen in print does not say to what degree this option existed. So we're not changing any history here. We're just adding clarification that Halp would have had to tell me it is a very limited option. The Battle of Monterey would have ascertained what Lee was doing if Lee was setting up in the mountains to fight a general battle here. Gettysburg would have been a limited option. You all work it out in your mind. Talk to Bill on how Meade would have been able to funnel supplies maybe to another railhead, because Gettysburg is extremely limited that way. One final point before we move on, and Mike's going to talk to us about the battle itself. I'm giving you some background, hopefully to add some cultural richness here to our stop, to our tour. This area would have been a lot more open. Mike's going to point that out with some wonderful visuals that we have for you at our next stop.
Show the picture.
Yeah, I'll wait till the next stop and let you show it. He's got a wonderful stop coming up. I'm excited about it. But it's going to show the area being much more open. And in part, it was far more open from trees because of a furnace. Remember we mentioned the Tapeworm Railroad, and there was, okay, and Thaddeus Stevens hopes to connect Gettysburg with his financial endeavor. Well, Berea Furnace is about 2 miles in that direction. It's on modern-day Iron Springs Road. And a furnace requires a lot of wood. A lot of wood. It requires a lot of wood. That's right, it's over to our left. And this is the process. By the way, if you backtrack on Iron Springs Road and go back about 2 miles, mainly east, you'll cross Tom's Creek. Look up on the side of the hill inside the woods along Tom's Creek, and you'll see the remnants of an old chimney. This is what an iron furnace required. It required woods, mountain, water. The woods were used for trees to be felled to slowly cook till they became charcoal. They would be chopped up and taken to the furnace that looks like a large stone fireplace. Along with that, mined out of the side of this mountain, that's probably when they discovered, Mike, the ISP minerals over here years ago, that there's a special rock that slate roofs are made with from here. ISP minerals is belching out smoke behind me, and you'll see that as you're walking from the stop. But as they mine this area, they were looking for limestone, because that's also good for an iron furnace. And then finally, ore, crude metal in the mountain. And in the fireplace, this large chimney along the creek, those who were going to fill up the furnace would follow a path across the top, okay? And they would put in or shovel in limestone first. Then molten metal ore, crude rock with metal components in it. Then shovel in the charcoal and light it. Build a good fire. The charcoal would cause the crude metal bits that are in the stone to turn to liquid, and then sieve through the limestone, which increased the intensity of the heat by adding oxygen to the mixture. That liquid metal would come down through the bottom of the fireplace, and the heat would be enhanced by bellows that were working, constantly blowing air, making it hotter, and those bellows were being operated by what? Water. A huge water wheel that was turning in Tom's Creek. It probably was dammed up and it had an overshoot to make it go twice as fast. It was a mill race making it go fast. And a crankshaft controlled by clutches, leather belts, and pulleys was inside, directing that energy towards the bellows to keep pumping, so that the molten rock became liquefied, poured out the bottom into sand cast, and when it dried it became pig iron, which you could turn into, a blacksmith could make into shovels or parts for wagons or pitchforks or any number of things that you could imagine at that time. Because of iron furnaces being here, it cleared the area, as we explained what it looked like during the battle, cleared it of a lot of trees. If you go to the wilderness in Virginia, where Lee fought his battle against Grant in the wilderness, they fought at Catherine Furnace. I mentioned that by accident earlier. Catherine Furnace turned out to be a hell on earth because it caught fire. While there was low vegetation, thickets and briars that easily caught fire and burned a lot of the wounded men to death, those thickets were there because what? The furnace had consumed up all the mature trees in the area. If you go to some places in Western Europe, you can stand, let's say Scotland, for example, or Ireland, and you can look and see a mountain, something that qualifies as a mountain, close to 1,000 feet high, and it's green, and you can see goats climbing along the side, and there's no trees. That had to do for thousands of years. During the Middle Ages, the fuel, the wood source was used up, and there were no forestry plans to replant those trees. That's why there are mountains covered with bright green grass in certain parts of Europe today. Fortunately, a lot of those areas have been replanted in the United States. What outdates the furnace, the concept of the furnace, is the invention of the steam engine, late 1780s, and that once that's invented, then furnaces are portable. If some wealthy person like a Carnegie or Rockefeller or someone over in Europe wants to buy wants to actually buy a steam engine, they can build a factory anywhere and the people will come. They no longer need the same water source and the wood source. They're not hooked to the wilderness for their supplies to make iron. So that changes the landscape in this area as it affected the wilderness battlefield. Now we've created some broad context about the importance of the rail line as it relates to Monterey. We've also discussed the exit strategy of how Lee plans to pull out of Gettysburg, how important the Fairfield Road is and the Cashtown Road. And then finally we talked about how the terrain has been affected from the felling of trees and the using of resources towards iron factories. At our next stop, my colleague Mike Vallone and Bill Dowling are going to discuss the battle itself, the Battle of Monterey Pass, exit strategy. Let's make our exit. Let's about face. And
first of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Dan Oates and his wife. Just this morning gave us permission to come on their land. Let's give him a hand. Okay. We're figuring 400. Maybe 450. And if that's the truth, this might be the largest anniversary walk ever. We're very proud of that. We're proud of you. Thank you very much. Bill Dowling is now going to talk to you about the strategy behind. Oh yeah, I'm going to hear the end of that in the guide room. The strategy behind a retreat and a pursuit. Here's Mr. Bill Dowling. Just give me a hand. No, I'm going to hold it. He told me to just leave it here.
Okay. And you just thought I was another pretty face holding up cards, right? I do get to speak a little bit. But before I do, I want to say, really extend my thank you for everyone coming out, braving the heat and the humidity. We really appreciate your efforts, taking time out of your holiday weekend to come out and participate in this walk. This started maybe about a year ago when Michael and I were kicking around some ideas, but the impetus really belonged to Michael. And as he said, he's a New Yorker and from Brooklyn, and Mikey and I came out here and
Yeah, it's a real surprise with this accent.
yeah,
huh?
yeah. And Mikey started knocking on some doors, and I said, Mike, I said, you know, we should make appointments with these people. He says, forget about it, you know. That's all one word in Brooklyn. Forget about it. But it was through Mike's efforts and his vision that this thing started. And a lot of trips over here back and forth, and you know, doing some research. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the great work done by Kent Masterson Brown, a great book that spurred our interest, my interest even more. And you really, you know, just preparing this little blurb that I'm going to give you today, I can't imagine all the research that's involved in the digging and the checking of facts that are involved in doing a book. And Mr. Brown, I applaud his scholarship, his intellect, and we now have a great book concerning the retreat here at Gettysburg. Name of the book?
Retreat from Gettysburg. Kent Masterson Brown. Subtitle, Lee, Logistics, and the Pennsylvania Campaign. By the way, what's your name? I have friends back in Brooklyn.
I'd also like to acknowledge and thank Mr. Troy Harman for allowing me to be a part of this. And you know, I value Troy's scholarship also, along with Mike's. And one more group, and that's we have a number of licensed battlefield guides with us here today. And I really feel privileged to be a part of our organization. And I appreciate their support that they have lent to me. And I just wanted to mention them also. And of course, my wife will kill me if I don't say and acknowledge her support. So, okay, let's get on with it. All right. Now, one final man. All right. He can't join us here today, but he was with us in spirit. He was with us every step of the way, lending his support. And I'd just like to mention the name of George Gargis.
There you go.
All right. Georgie was not able to come out here with us today, but those also serve who stand in the background and encourage people to move ahead and get involved. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do here very briefly is try to bring in the theories of warfare as they apply to the Gettysburg campaign, and particularly to the retreat here at Gettysburg. And now there were two military theorists at the time, and their names were, I got to look at this, Baron Antoine Henri de Jomini. and there was another man who was well known, who was a German by the name of Karl von Clausewitz. Now, Djameni was the first man to articulate, interpret, and systematize Napoleon's methods and theories of war. So he's the guy that wrote it down. All right? Now we're going to try and show how this retreat, Lee's retreat, and Meade's pursuit are going to follow along these lines and these military axioms that were espoused by these two military theorists. All right. Now, I want you to start, thinking about the number of decisions, the myriad number of decisions that are now have to be made by these commanders. All right. You just don't jump in the car and leave. Okay, we're gonna get out of town. It's not that simple. All right. And these decisions have to be made quickly, and they have to be disseminated among thousands and thousands of men spread out over a widespread area, widespread battle line. Now, the first thing Lee has to consider is, will Meade counterattack? And if he does, how am I going to meet this? And if he does, where will that counterattack come from? Now, does Lee prepare defenses? Or does he start his retreat right away? Does he have adequate transportation to supplies, to carry these supplies back, to move out? How about all his wagons and his horses? He's not going to just pick these things up, out off of the trees, so to speak. Right? Now, how many wounded does he have? How is he going to care for these people? Does he take them with him? And how, more importantly, how is he going to get out of here? Or get out of Gettysburg? What are the roads available and the routes that are available to him? Now, General Meade, on the other hand, let's look at that side of the coin. All right? General Meade, the thing he has, first thing is, what is Lee's intentions? Do I counterattack right away? All right? What troops do I use? What troops are cut up? What are available for use? Do I have sufficient supplies and ammunition to sustain a counterattack? So these are, here again, these are command decisions that have to be made by these command and made quickly. Okay. Now, Article 38 of Djameni's book, and this was published in 1838. And Djameni's, here again, what he put down was Napoleon's principles and theories of warfare. Now, this book is going to offer some of the answers that are facing Lee and facing Meade. And both of these men had knowledge of these principles. We're not so sure they may have read the book or not, but we are sure, being professional military men, they're well aware that these principles existed. Now, Karl von Clausewitz, he was a German military theorist. His book on war, that's the title, On War, was published in 1832. Djameni, 1838. Meade and Lee, here again, they may not have read the book, especially Clausewitz, because he wasn't translated from the German into after Djameni. But they were well aware of these principles. And these principles were those that were transmitted or come down, practical knowledge that were used in all wars by all commanders before the Gettysburg campaign. So and both of these men expressed similar principles, and they're both saying the same thing, but perhaps in a little bit more different language. Well, one was Swiss, the other was German, so it is different language. But nevertheless, they're saying the same basic principles. Right? These men did not invent these theories. They just wrote them down, systematized them, and put them down on black and white for people to evaluate, to read, and to study. Lee decides to withdraw. And now he has to move all his troops, his supplies, his wounded, his artillery, all the confiscated hogs, sheep, cattle, and all the rest of the tons of supplies. He has to get these things moving. Right? And Mike is going to explain the nuts and bolts of how this campaign and how this action works. Okay? Now, the survival of the Army of Northern Virginia now hangs in the balance, right? And it's going to be dependent upon Lee's decision. So on the 4th, afternoon of the 4th, right, Lee's, I like to call it great escape, is going to be undertaken. Right. So the first thing Lee wants to do, he wants to unburden himself of all his prisoners. He has approximately 3,500, 4,000 Union prisoners. He doesn't want to have to care for these people because he's got to take them with him. He offers Meade in exchange. Meade says, I do not have the authority to make this exchange. So now Lee has to guard and actually provide for these Union troops during the withdrawal. All right. Clausewitz says, in a lost battle, the power of any army is broken, the moral to a greater degree than the physical. So the morale of the Army of Northern Virginia, they're going back, and to some extent, this is the first major battle and the first major defeat that they've really suffered. So they're experiencing things maybe that they never felt before, right? Needless to say, I think it's a fair assumption to say it had to affect their morale, and it had to affect their morale negatively. Right? Jomini, the Swiss theorist, his very first sentence on Article 38 of his book says, retreats are certainly the most difficult operations of war. And for those very reasons that we just told you about. This man, he's a noted theorist of the time, and this is the first thing he says, and this is how he introduces his theories of retreat and pursuit. Now, how is Lee going to get his troops and his wounded out? And how is he going to pull off this most difficult of operations? Lee is going to employ a combination of methods, a combination of axioms suggested by both Jomini and Clausewitz. He is going to move over parallel roads, over a mass front, massing his troops over a single front. And his wounded, as Mike already said, is going to travel on one route. His artillery and his strong rear guard is going to be traveling on another route. While retreating, Lee is also trying to swing back the pendulum that has swung toward Meade, and he's trying to reestablish what Clausewitz says, the equilibrium or the balance of power between the armies. So he has to try and keep discipline during this retreat. Lee will do this, like I said, by applying axioms expressed by Clausewitz, and that's that strong rear guard. Now, he's going to conduct a very slow and deliberate withdrawal, and he's going to have his troops stacked one corps behind another, and these infantry troops, or his strong rear guard, is going to provide or almost invite attack by Meade. And by keeping one fresh corps in back of another, he's going to be able to keep, and these troops during the retreat are going to be able to leapfrog back, so to speak, and he's always going to have a fresh corps available to him you know, providing that very key element here of a strong rear guard. Okay. By keeping those fighting troops massed, the Army is better prepared to meet these attacking forces. And all right, I mentioned that leapfrog series of attacks.